Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from around the world. It's 5:30 in the morning here in sunny Lancashire in the United Kingdom. The sun has just peeked out over the Pennines out of my front window. Dan, I'm delighted to be joined by you. I believe that you're all out of sorts because you're working on two different time zones over there. So just let me know how you feel and how are things over there in Los Angeles.
Things are good. I mean, I've traveled through the time zones before, not my first rodeo, so I'm excited to be here in Los Angeles for this big card. Got here on Wednesday, and it's been fun. And it's I haven't been to Los Angeles for a few years because there hasn't been a big mega fight, a big mega card in this part of the country in Los Angeles, which is a great fight city, but it's heavy on boxing, but not the big event hasn't been here for a long time. So I was thinking about it. Seb, the last time I was out here to cover a boxing event was in 2019 September, when you had the outstanding unification welterweight fight between Errol Spence and Sean Porter. And then, a few months after that came the pandemic, and I didn't go to a fight for, 16, 17 months. And then ever since I've been going back to the fights, they just haven't been here in California, New York, Texas, Las Vegas, places like that. But this is the first big show in LA in quite a number of years, it seems to me.
Yeah, the last time I was in LA, for anybody that cares, was for KSI versus Logan Paul 2.
Well, that's your problem. That's your problem.
Anyway, Dan, look, we're here to talk about Crawford Madrimov. We've had the press conference, we've had the weigh-in, we've had an absolutely sensational, stacked fight week with the media day, the grand arrivals, the public workout, the fight card on the Wednesday night that nobody was really anticipating that they've dropped on us. From your experience this week, how has the first Riyadh season card outside of Riyadh, gone so far?
Well, you mentioned about those fights that they did on the Santa Monica Pier on Wednesday night. Those fights involving some of the prospects, namely three prospects. You had Mark Castro, who was one of Matchroom's prospects, undefeated 130-pounder from Fresno, California. Then you had Giasov, who was the welterweight silver medalist, 2 Olympics ago. And then you had new Frank Warren signing the kid that was 1-0, super middleweight, named Nathan Lugo. He's now 2-0. So those were the 3 featured fights. So they were originally going to place those on the card on Saturday underneath the Crawford Madrimov prior to the beginning of the pay-per-view. But they decided, because they were doing the workouts on the pier and the ring was set up. I mean, it must have, taken a little bit of logistical organization and cost more money and things along those lines. But they figured, we'll do the show. It was open to the public for free, and you didn't have to buy a ticket. And they had pretty much a standing room only crowd of what they could get into that area where they did the fights. I was up there. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I've covered a lot of fights in a lot of interesting places, but I can't say I've ever covered boxing matches on a pier and there's an amusement park where some rides and some in games and bars and things right next to it. So like, I don't know, 50 yards maybe or less from where we were sitting by the ring, there was the roller coaster. So it was going around and you heard the people screaming, and then you got the guys fighting in the ring. It was a really cool atmosphere. So that was very enjoyable. And so I think it's gone from that perspective. The folks from Riyadh Season have come here to Los Angeles, and they're trying to make it as big as they can. And there's some growing pains. I think one of the things I haven't loved about it, but that's not their fault. I mean, it's just the nature of being in Los Angeles is that everything is kind of spread out. So it's a little bit of a trouble, because no matter where you go, you got to get in the car, and it's always traffic, and it's kind of a pain. It's completely the opposite. If you're going to, say, a fight in Vegas, and let's say the fight's at the MGM, pretty much everything is contained within the confines of this massive resort. But that doesn't mean that it was bad here, because, like I said, having those events on the pier was very cool. They did the ceremonial weigh-in was outdoors at LA Live, which was nice, and a nice spot there. That was the convenient one, because it's just a few steps from our hotel. But it's been pretty cool. It feels to me like they wanted to make a spectacle, make a splash, and it feels to me like they're doing that. It's kind of been pretty cool. I mean, boxing people everywhere in the hotel, and the signage is everywhere. You feel like it's a big event.
Yeah, so we'll start from the most recent event and we'll roll it back to the press conference. So we've just had the weigh-in over there in LA. Crawford's come in slightly under the weight. It was the 154.3, and Madrimov's come in at the 154 limit. So from what you've seen at the weigh-in, you were at the actual official weigh-in as well this morning, as opposed to the ceremonial weigh-in. How did everybody look on the scales, and did anything out of the ordinary happen?
nothing out of the ordinary happened. I mean, the main event fighters, Madrimov and Crawford, both looked in phenomenal condition. One thing that's very clear is Madrimov, he's not so much that he's taller than Crawford. He's much like wider and thicker across his shoulders and his chest and his back. He's just a bigger man from that standpoint. But I've been covering Terence Crawford's entire career since he's become, even like a co-feature type of fighter. And he looks in about as good a condition as I've ever seen. I don't know how you look at him the way he looked at 154 or just a shade under I was at that, like you said, the official commission weigh-in that was 9 o'clock in the morning. And Crawford was there, first guy on the scale, absolutely ripped to the bone. I mean, look, I don't know if he, there was no way, I don't think he could have ever made welterweight, having to shave another 7 pounds off that frame that he had. So he looked really, really good. Madrimov looked excellent. And all the guys on the card, even the heavyweights, like guys like Jarrell Miller, we'll get to that fight, and Andy Ruiz, who've never been known as having big, buff, muscular bodies, considering the types of fight and the weights that they've come in the past and maybe sometimes how they've looked. Those guys looked in very good condition. Jarrell Miller looks in about his best condition he's been. Andy Ruiz looked in good shape, relatively speaking. I mean, it seems to me every single fighter on this card, and I saw every single one of them weigh in, everybody looks like they really took this fight seriously, and everybody seems to be in best shape they could be in. Now, whether that's going to translate to victories, obviously, not everybody can win. Somebody's going to lose, obviously. But everybody seems to put themselves in the best position to win in terms of the way their physiques and their conditioning looked.
Yeah, we'll come to sort of predictions a little bit later on, but let's just run through the card so far. So you were saying then about Jarrell Miller and Andy Ruiz. Jarrell Miller came in at 305.6 pounds, 27 pounds lighter than the 333 pound he weighed against Daniel Dubois. Ruiz weighed in at 274.4 pounds. Now, a lot of people are talking about this fight as being a stepping stone to one of these guys potentially getting a title shot at some point. Andrew Ruiz is on the road to redemption after, obviously, he was the champion after beating Anthony Joshua in 2019. What do you think's on the line for these two, and where do you think the winner goes from this fight?
Well, first of all, it's hard now to get a title shot because you have all the belts held by, well, now 2 guys, but both of them have obviously fights coming up. Usyk is defending in the rematch against Tyson Fury. Dubois is going to be fighting Anthony Joshua. So there is no clear path. It's not like when you have the 4 belts that are splintered, and it's obviously a little bit easier to position yourself. But Andy Ruiz and Jarrell Miller, for that matter, they need to get the win. That's the bottom line. I mean, Andy hasn't fought for over 2.5 years or so. And he's back in business and looked like he took the fight seriously. Like I said, Jarrell Miller is in much better shape, it seems to me, than he was against Daniel Dubois. And the winner of the fight is going to probably figure in another solid quality matchup among these heavyweights that have been being featured on the Riyadh season card. So they know there's another big payday out there for them. And if they keep on winning, there will be some type of title shot because eventually, it will be played out in terms of what's going on with Fury and Usyk and Joshua and Dubois. And it is also conceivable that when Fury and Usyk have the rematch, that those belts may become splintered at some point and one will become available. But basically what they need to do is go in there and do the best that they can, and at the very least make it a good fight, because what I've liked about what the folks at Riyadh Season have done is that when guys have lost, they have brought them back. They just, dust them off and bring them back. So, they did it with Deontay Wilder. They've done it with Joseph Parker. He was winning. I'm just saying they brought back other guys that have lost. Joseph was winning the fights, but they brought back Jarrell Miller as a perfect example. He put in a great effort and made it a fun, exciting fight, even though he didn't win in the last fight against Dubois. They didn't say, forget about it, we're not going to use you again. It was a fun fight, and they decided to match him tough. So as long as these heavyweights are willing to fight the other top guys, and the folks at Riyadh Season are obviously paying them well, then I think everybody will fight each other. So to me, it's about winning, of course. But you know what? If you lose, you'll lose in a manner that is compelling, that's dramatic, that makes fans want to still see you, even if you don't come up with the W. Give Turki Al-Sheikh a reason to say, you know what, he lost with valor. I want to see this man fight again because he gave us what he could. He might not have got the hand raised, but it was worth your time to watch this guy perform. And that's what it's about, entertaining the fans, especially in the heavyweight division.
Yeah, so just looking further down the card. So I think the opening fight of the card, and you correct me here if I'm wrong, is Andy Cruz versus Antonio Moreno on the main card. Is that correct? From 3 p.m.?
That is correct. Yep, that's correct. 3 p.m. local time.
Eddie Hearn has been very vocal about Andy Cruz, bigging him up. That's his job, of course. But He's in there with Antonio Moran. Andy Cruz, 65 ranked. Antonio Moran, 24 ranked. Andy Cruz, 3-0. Antonio Moran, 30 wins, 60 defeats. Dan, Andy Cruz, is this expected victory for him?
Of course. I mean, and those rankings don't mean anything in a fight like this because Andy, like you said, he's only got the 3 professional fights, but he's one of the most decorated amateurs that boxing has seen in decades. The guy is an Olympic gold medalist from Tokyo 2020. He is a 3-time amateur world champion, 2-time Pan American champion. I mean, this is one of the most decorated fighters in a long time. And what I love about Andy Cruz is that he doesn't fight in the stereotypical manner that a lot of the great Cuban amateurs fights, or the way that they fight, even though it's extremely successful, winning medals in the amateur ranks with their touch and move and the way the slickness that they have. A lot of times, unfortunately, it doesn't translate into it can translate into professional success, but it doesn't build them into attractions that people want to see. They oftentimes make terrible fights, let's be honest. But the thing about Andy Cruz is when he came to the United States, and it was very difficult for him to get here, the way he had to, leave Cuba and defect and finally make a home here. He didn't do what most of the Cubans that do arrive in the United States who are going to pursue fights, to pursue a boxing career. They stay within that Cuban community in South Florida, in the Miami area. Some of them have gone to Vegas and trained with Ishmael Salas, who's a former Cuban coach, but it's a great pro trainer, but he teaches that kind of style. Andy Cruz went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, one of the roughest, toughest boxing cities in the United States, and he's working with Bozy Ennis, who is the father and trainer of welterweight title holder Jaron Ennis. And if you can't learn how to become a pro-style fighter in that gym, you have no hope. But Andy Cruz is doing that. He wants to be a crowd-pleasing guy, so he's learning that his great skills to add to them and fight in a more crowd-pleasing style. That's not to say don't use defense and leave yourself out there to get pounded on, but you can still take a step forward and make it more entertaining for the fans and still do what you have to do. So he's in with Antonio Moran, who is a very hard-nosed veteran, solid Mexican. I guess you could say he's journeyman-ish, but he's extremely experienced. He's fought a lot of top guys. He always gives a good effort, win or lose. He's the impressive thing to me. He's only been knocked out 1 time in his 6 losses. That was a spectacular knockout by a fighter that's not known for big punching power. That was Devin Haney before he was lightweight champion. And I have that image of that knockout like tattooed in my brain forever because I was sitting about 5 feet from the ring when he almost crashed into my lap that night. So that was the one knockout loss that Moran had. But Andy's 3-0. This other guy's got like almost 40 fights, and he's fought a lot of top guys. So clearly, Andy Ruiz turned pro in a 10-rounder. He's fought all 10-rounders so far. He's fighting actual legitimate opponents. He's on the fast track. You get past Antonio Moran, he's not going to need 15, 10, 12. He's going to probably fight for a world title inside 10 fights, it seems to me.
Moving up the card then, Dan, Isaac Cruz, the Mexican fighter. And
that's the co-feature.
Is that the co-feature? Okay, I'm just looking. I've got a list of the card here, so they're obviously not in order in that case then. So the co-feature then, Isaac Cruz versus Jose Valenzuela. One thing I wanted to bring up when I was bringing this fight up with you was some criticism that I've seen online of this card is that there isn't a feature, as in a main event, including a Mexican fighter when they're in LA. What are your thoughts on that criticism, and is there any value in it?
I mean, it's a valid criticism, but the Saudis are the ones that are footing the bill, and it's their, it's their show. They can do it how they want to do it. Obviously, having Terence Crawford, the #1 fighter in the world, in the view of many people, in your main event against a very reputable, even if not a well-known champion in the main event, it's not unreasonable. But certainly, if you really want to make a splash in Los Angeles compared to whatever splash you think this card has made, yeah, I mean, you have such a massive Hispanic audience here, and there's so much great boxing history with Mexican and Mexican-American fighters here that it is pretty regular that if you have a big stadium fight or a big arena fight, that oftentimes you'll have a Mexican in the main event. But that's not always the case. I mean, I covered, as an example, at the arena in downtown Los Angeles, Lennox Lewis from England against Vitaly Klitschko from Ukraine in the heavyweight championship. There was no Mexican in that main event. So there's been others like that. But yeah, I mean, it's expected that here in this region, you're going to see main events with Mexican fighters. But they put Isaac Pitbull Cruz in the co-feature. He's one of the more popular Mexican champions currently. And I have to tell you, Seb, being at the ceremonial weigh-in, and they introduced all the different fights, including Terence Crawford and Israel Madrimov in the main event. The guy that got the biggest pop from the crowd, the loudest cheers, was definitely, without question, was Isaac Pitbull Cruz. He's a very popular figure. The fans love him. They follow him around, and he's always accommodating, taking pictures. I saw him in the hotel taking pictures with people when I got here the other day. And Valenzuela is a good contender. But the thing about it, what's interesting to this fight, so you got Pitbull. He's making his first title defense at 140. He won the belt back when he knocked out Rolando Romero in his previous fight. And Valenzuela is moving up. Well, Pitbull moved up to challenge for that title from lightweight to junior welterweight. And now you got Valenzuela, whose entire career has been as a lightweight. Now he's moving up to challenge for the title. So in essence, you've got, two very good lightweights, but they're fighting for a junior welterweight title. Valenzuela's kind of turned things around for him. He had the loss to a very controversial loss in a fight against Chris Colbert, but he got the revenge in a devastating performance where he knocked him out in the rematch. So, he's on the upswing. Pitbull's on the upswing. That's going to be a hell of a fight.
Two more fights to run through then, Dan. David Morrell versus Radivoje Kaladzic. Have I got that right?
You said that very well. I got to give you props. I just call him Hot Rod like everybody else. And by the way, when I was coming up to my room before we started doing this, I was standing by the elevator with Hot Rod, who was there talking, like, I guess, to family or friends, and seemed like he was getting ready to go up to get some rest tonight because he's got a busy day tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. Before we go into that, I was just saying to you off air that when we're at these events, when it gets to the Saturday, you've had such a busy week with all these scheduled events. When it gets to the Saturday, you sometimes feel a little bit lost because the event doesn't start till late in the afternoon or middle of the afternoon. So you think, well, what am I going to do for the day? What do you actually get up to generally, Dan, especially when you're away from home at these events? I was in London last week.
Tomorrow I'll wait. I won't set my alarm or anything like that. I'll go to bed probably pretty soon after we finish doing this, and I'll just wake up. When I wake up, I'll do a little work. I'll set up some stories, what I want to do. Just not like I don't know what's going to happen, but you can put the basic information. What's with their records. I just take some chunks of stories I've written with some background if I need it, so I can refresh my memory. And, basically set up the files I'm going to use and fill in like the names in my scorebook and write down the judges in my little scorebook. And, I've got my routine that I do before every fight that I cover. I've been doing it for so long. It's like muscle memory. So and I make sure I've got my bag packed the right way. Make sure I don't forget my laptop, my technology, my cords, my phone, all the things you need, my extension cord, whatever you might need. And I just run through my little checklist, and it's actually fucking obsessive. If you want to know the truth, it's like bizarre. Like I just have this, it's like you just have to go through your laundry list, and I got to follow it the right way, or I feel like I'm not doing it right. So it just I do the same thing every single time when I go to a fight. I've got that routine, and I don't deviate.
Right then, Morrell versus Hot Rod. Then Dan, it's a WBA World Light Heavy, which is a vacant title. What's on the line for each fight? How do you see this one going?
Well, first of all, it's the regular title because the WBA, which promised they would get rid of these extraneous titles, said, you know what, fuck it, we're going to do this regular title anyway after they got rid of it, because the actual champion is the unified 3-belt champion, Arthur Beterbiev, who's getting ready to fight Dimitri Bivol this fall for the undisputed title on another one of the cards that will take place in Riyadh. So David Morrell is moving up from super middleweight, where he held the WBA regular super middleweight title, which he made him the mandatory that never was called and never happened between him and Canelo Alvarez, who was at the time undisputed. Now he's unified. And now he's going up to light heavyweight to fight Hot Rod for another regular title. But David Morrell, putting all the nonsense about the belts aside, he's an extremely talented fighter. Another one of the fighters that came out of Cuba, but adopted a pro style in the way he fights. Didn't stay in Miami area, went to Minnesota, Minneapolis, lives the quiet life up there, trains his rear end off, and is a really, really outstanding fighter. I mean, he's only got maybe 10, 11 fights at that, but he's already, even before he moved up, you would say Canelo, Benavidez, and you could say maybe David Morrell was the number 3 super middleweight in the sport. Now he's going to light heavyweight. And he's, Hot Rod is a guy who's kind of been inconsistent. Even when he's won fights, sometimes he just looks kind of like blah. But he's experienced. It's a reasonable fight, in my opinion, for David's debut in the weight class. Hot Rod's losses have only been against quality guys. Like for example, he got knocked out by Arthur Beterbiev when he challenged for one of the titles back a few years ago. So I don't know if it's worth a WBA title, regular or otherwise, but in terms of as a debut in the weight class, absolutely, it's a credible fight for Morrell to get his feet wet at 175. And he looked, again, same thing what I said about Crawford. I don't know, when I saw him at the weigh-in, if he was still trying to make 168, I'm like, I don't know where those pounds are coming from.
And the final fight then, Dan, on the card that we've not touched on yet is Jared Anderson versus Martin Bakole. Now, I've got listed here North American Boxing Federation Heavy Vacant and WBO International Heavy. Any corrections on them?
I don't know. You love those shit titles. I mean, I have no fucking clue what titles are at stake. I couldn't care less. It's not a world title, so who gives a damn?
Fair enough. Fair enough. So Jared Anderson going in this, then he is ranked slightly higher than Martin Bakole. What's on the line for these guys? Now, do you see this one going?
This is a crazy fight that they made. I love this fight. This to me is maybe the fight of the night, just because it's a great card. I mean, and I don't say that lightly. Anybody that's followed me or listened to my words of wisdom or however you want to describe it is, I'm hard on undercards. Like if they suck, I'm like, this card's, not very good, or this is that, and it's a problem with this, and this card's no good, or that fight's ridiculous. This is a truly honest to goodness loaded card. Like every single fight on the main card, all 6 fights I'm interested in for one reason or another. But the one that I think is the most interesting, because it's the one I really have the least idea of who I think is going to win, is this fight. You kind of can, Crawford's supposed to win, but I mean, an upset's not a shocker, but he's supposed to win. Ruiz is the favorite for a reason. Pitbull is the favorite for a reason, but you can see reasons for upsets. But the one where I could just flip a coin would be Anderson against Bakole, because they're both, in my mind, taking on a very solid, credible, hard-punching opponent. Jared Anderson is considered by most people to be the best up-and-coming American heavyweight. We don't have a lot of them right now, but he's been showing his stuff, over the course of his career. He's gotten to about, 17-0. He's fought some pretty, some decent names. He has the one win, I guess, that would be considered his best win, was a decision against the former heavyweight title holder, Charles Martin, who did hurt him in that fight, buzz him a little bit. So there are questions about how, if he got hurt by a guy like that, how is he going to take a shot from Martin Bakole, who's supposed to be a much bigger puncher? And he also outweighed him by quite a bit of weight. Martin came in like over 280 pounds. Jared was in the 250s. So, and Jared is also shorter than Martin Bakole. And so you can tell there's a definite size difference there, but Jared's a lot younger. But it's just a smash mouth kind of fight. I mean, someone's probably getting knocked out in this one. I just, how do you see that any other way? And so what's at stake is, step over that body and move on to the next big name. Turki Al-Sheikh has taken a liking to Jared Anderson. That's why he's on the card. They were able to work it out with Top Rank to put him on the show. And if he can win the fight, he's on the way. And if Martin Bakole can win, he becomes a much bigger name. He's already had some experience against good opponents. He's been on one of the Riyadh season cards prior to this that took place in Saudi Arabia. His one loss was, you got to go back, I believe it was 2018. He got stopped in the 10th round of a 10-rounder by Michael Hunter, who was a United States Olympian and has, became, I guess you could say he's like a second-tier contender, but not a loss that you look at and say, boy, he lost to that guy. No, that's a good opponent that he lost to, and he's been winning ever since. So real fascinating fight. Remember also, I think a lot of people forget this, Seb, when it was first discussed that Jared would appear on this card, what they were going to do was match him with Deontay Wilder. But it was only if Deontay Wilder was able to come through the last fight, but he got knocked out by Zhang Zhilei, and that fight went away. So when that spot was open, it was actually Turki Al-Sheikh that was basically going down the list of heavyweights, and he knew Martin Bakole and liked him from when he appeared on one of the previous Saudi cards. And they asked him, would you fight Martin Bakole? And Jared Anderson was like, absolutely. They took the fight with no hesitation. And so it's a fascinating matchup in my mind. Definitely an interesting fight.
Well, very exciting. Right, Dan, we've come to that time then. We're going to talk predictions. It's fight day here.
Did we talk about the main event?
We talked about the main event at the start, but let's run through the main event then, Dan. So we've got Crawford versus Madrimov. Let's go into a bit more detail. So I'll just run through some quotes that we've seen from the fighters from the press conference then. So I'll start with what Bomac said. Bomac said the journey has been a struggle at times, but it's been fun most of the time. I'm sure me and any of the team members wouldn't want it to change. We build character inside the team and we are happy and excited to be here, but we came here to do a job. The challenge of moving to 154 and fighting Madrimov is a hill that you have to climb. I know that the team and everybody around the team want challenges like that, so you can say we are in the best out there. We have solidified that over the years. Just from those comments, what do you make of that? He says the journey has been a struggle at times. We don't expect it to be easy,
right?
But is there any more into that?
They just know where they came from. Like, they know where they've been. They know that it was hard early in Terence's career, not because he wasn't a great fighter. They just never got a chance to show it until they got the opportunity to fight in bigger fights, to fight on HBO, to be matched with bona fide opponents. then when they got a chance finally to fight for a title in the lightweight division, they had to travel to the UK and take on Ricky Burns in front of his fans. And so nothing was ever handed to Terence Crawford is, I think, the point. I've known Brian McIntyre for a very long time, and they don't forget where they came from. And they know that it's a struggle. And I think that because of that, and if you see some of the comments or hear some of the comments that Crawford has made, he appreciates the journey. Like, and to me, and I think the same thing, like in life in general, like if you have your goals that you want to achieve and get to a certain spot, but if you don't appreciate the trip along the way, what good is it? And I think that Terence Crawford is an appreciative guy of the struggle. It's made him who he is. And so he understands he's at the top now, but he also knows it wasn't easy to get there. And it's not easy to stay there. But, I think right now he feels like, I've reached this pinnacle, but every time I fight, someone wants to knock me off it. I still want to stay here. I've got other things I want to do, whether it's win another title in the junior middleweight division, which would make him a 4-division champion. Obviously, he has aspirations to move up even more weight classes and fight Canelo Alvarez, a fight that Turki Al-Sheikh has professed major interest in trying to put together. This is just another stop on the journey, as they say. Not an easy one. Madrimov is a quality opponent. A lot of people may not have heard of him, but he's got a massive amateur career. Been looking good in the pros. Never was given easy fights. Turned pro in a 10-rounder and was in with real opponents from day one. Didn't want to have easy fights, and he doesn't have one on Saturday. And listen, when guys win world titles, a lot of times they take a hometown fight, they take a softer touch, they get a showcase fight, grab a quick payday. They might be ordered to fight a mandatory. None of that held true for Israel Madrimov. This was a guy who said, you know what, I won this title. I'm willing to fight whoever they put me in front of, and if it's the best fighter in boxing, Terence Crawford, bring it on. I mean, he just wants to fight the best guys. So that's one of the reasons, because I know how Terence Crawford fights. I've watched Israel Madrimov since he turned pro. I remember meeting Israel Madrimov and talking to him in an elevator at a fight when he was fighting his second professional fight. And he was talking about back then how he wants to fight top names. And now he's here a few years later. And, again, I know this is not a star-studded main event. It's not going to appeal maybe to the mainstream sports audience. But if you're a boxing fan, this is a real fight, in my opinion. I don't care that Madrimov only has 11 professional fights. And Terence Crawford is 40-0 and, been undisputed in 2 divisions and won titles in, from lightweight to welterweight, and has been the fighter of the year and has, done a lot of things in the sport. This is a real fight, in my opinion. If he can go in there and take care of Madrimov, that I'm going to say it like this. I'm not saying it's the best win of his career, but it will probably be in the top 3 or 4 wins of his career. That's what he's looking at. And if he wins the fight, then he thinks that Turki can make the Canelo fight, provided that Canelo does his job against Edgar Berlanga in September.
Yeah, well, before we get on to what the fighters themselves have said, Eddie Hearn is obviously there representing Israel Madrimov. Eddie Hearn said, "This guy to my left is a serious man. Since he turned professional, he came out as one of the best amateurs from Uzbekistan. We have been waiting for an opportunity to show his greatness. Nobody ever wanted to fight him, and he's a 154-pound wrecking machine, not just with power and chin, but with great movement and ring IQ. On Saturday night, this will be the toughest fight of Terence Crawford's career, no doubt at all. You're going to see a wonderful fight between 2 modern-day greats." Now, do you echo the sentiments, or is that Eddie Hearn bigging him up?
I think most of what Eddie said, I actually agree with. I don't know if I call him a modern great. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily the toughest fight of Terence Crawford's career. But the other stuff, I believe. I said it about Madrimov. Just because you might not have heard about him much, or you've only seen that he's got 11 pro fights, that should not fool you. I mean, this is a real fighter. I can't say the extreme example would be Lomachenko, who was winning a world title in his 3rd professional fight, who fought for a world title in his 2nd pro fight and gave a veteran like Orlando Salido everything he could handle, but just didn't have enough of the pro experience behind him to handle that. And he moved really quickly, obviously. Madrimov is a similar kind of guy. Andy Cruz, who we talked about earlier, is a similar kind of guy. They're not going to need a whole bunch of fights to really be in with an elite fighter. We've seen that before, and we've seen it now. Madrimov, this is his first chance to fight an elite fighter. But if you take a look at the 11 previous fights he's had, he's never had a soft touch, and he turned pro in a 10-round fight. So that's the type of guy he is. So I agree with a lot of what Eddie said, and most of that. I'm just not sure I consider him a modern great yet. Maybe he'll become that, but he's got work to do. And if he beats Terence Crawford, he's on his way.
I'm just going to read you a comment we've had on the live stream just to see your reaction to it. It's from Boxing Magic, Mech Side. It says, "There's no way a pound-for-pound #1 fighter has any business fighting a 10-0 fighter. He's waited a year."
Whoever that guy that made that opponent is a fucking idiot.
Fair enough.
That's absolutely ridiculous. That tells me that whoever put that comment in doesn't know jack shit about boxing and doesn't know anything about Israel Madrimov.
Right. Well, moving on to the fighters themselves.
I love this. Get some more of that. I'll take apart whoever else puts in a comment.
I'll have a quick look to see if anybody else. But we haven't had any other other than the same person saying it's a cherry pick fight for Crawford. So there you go. There's the bone.
So a cherry pick fight against a guy who's undefeated, who won a world title by knockout against an undefeated opponent just a few months ago, who has about 300 amateur fights, who was one of the best amateurs in the world, who was fighting real fights his entire career. And by the way, you tell me who else in the 154-pound weight class, as it is presently constituted, you would rank higher at the present time than Israel Madrimov. The answer is nobody.
Well, for the viewers, I've just put the comments on screen just so everybody can see where we're getting the comments from. If you do want to leave a comment, feel free, jump in, and if we get time before the end of the show, me and Dan will react to them, or Dan will react to them also. Right, Terence Crawford then from the press comments. He said, "I'm expecting Israel Madrimov to come out and do what he's been doing, and he's been phenomenal in the fights that he's had. People are forgetting I'm strong and punch hard too. People keep thinking this whole fight, he's the bigger guy and stronger guy, since I'm moving up in weight. We always have the same questions in other fights against bigger guys, but when they get in the ring with me, I'm stronger than they thought. I'm going to be stronger at 154 and be more energized. I'm going to be less stress. It's going to be less stress on my body with the weight, and I'm going to be ready. I'm good right now, and I expect to win however it comes. If it's a knockout, a decision, I expect to win." I assume you feel the same way, Dan?
I think that's a fair statement from Terence Crawford. I mean, he has knocked out most of his opponents. The only thing I do think about, and I don't necessarily think it is going to make a major part in this particular fight, but for every fighter, not just Terence Crawford, at some point, there reaches a point where the weight becomes a factor in your performance. I'm not sure if Terence Crawford is there just yet. Remember, he won his first title at 135 pounds. Although, if you take a look at his weights in his previous fights, he fought a number of junior welterweight fights prior to challenging for the lightweight title. But then he obviously stayed at lightweight for a while and made some defenses. But now he's about 20 pounds heavier. But it doesn't look like it because, like I mentioned, if you take a look at how he looked at the weigh-in, you would never say this was a guy that was a lightweight. He looks in tremendous condition, carries the weight well, and we'll see if he can carry the firepower that he's had because he's knocking everybody out. Now, he hasn't fought in a year. And in the last fight against Errol Spence, which was a very significant fight for undisputed in the 147-pound weight class, he looked absolutely spectacular. He absolutely destroyed Errol Spence. And as great as Crawford looked in that fight, that's not – the two things can be true at the same time. So, yes, Crawford looked absolutely phenomenal, but clearly Errol Spence was compromised from things that were going on, whether it was making the weight or, the fact that he had all the injuries that he had prior to that with the eye and with the car accident and that sort of thing. So I'm not trying to take anything away from Errol's or from Terence Crawford's performance against Errol Spence, but you have to at least think that maybe that was one of the reasons he looked as good as he looked. Maybe he still would have looked great even if Crawford was coming in the ring against an absolutely prime, perfect Errol Spence. Clearly that was not the case, but we'll see if we're not like, if was that a performance that he overperformed in because of where Errol was, and now we're going to see maybe come back to earth a little bit against Madrimov? I don't know the answer to that. I suspect no, but who knows? There'll be a lot of people that will second guess, and Errol Spence will be looked at as a guy that was a mirage maybe going into that fight if somehow Madrimov pulls the upset.
Well, moving on to Madrimov then, Joel Diaz has spoken. He said, "We have a lot of respect for Team Crawford. We're grateful for the opportunity, but everybody knows us, and my team knows that we train to win. We have been on the B-side many times, and we got the victory. I think Saturday night is going to be one of those nights. A lot of people don't know Israel Madrimov, but he needed this fight. He needed this opportunity so that the world could know him. You guys are going to see what a great fighter, what a great athlete, and even more importantly, what a great person Israel Madrimov is." How do you think he's going to fare in this one, Dan? Do you think that everybody's so focused on Terence Crawford, that nobody's looking past the fact that Israel Madrimov could cause what many consider the upset in this fight?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And it reminds me when I got here to Los Angeles and I came into the hotel on Wednesday morning, I ran into Israel Madrimov. He was there with a couple of guys that I know on his team. And like I said, I don't know Israel well, but we met before. He knows who I am. I know who he is. And the funny thing about it, though, and I actually wrote about this in one of the pieces I wrote, is that here you have the champion, the undefeated champion in this fight against Crawford. And he was in the hotel lobby and nobody knew who he was. And here's the crazy thing about it, Seb. they have a giant banners that were like over the hotel door. They had the big banner with his picture on it over the check-in desk. On the elevators, they've got the stickers with the fight art and his faces on it. And still nobody knew who the heck he was. So he's keeping a low profile, and he's just waiting to strut his stuff on Saturday. And what Joel Diaz said is, yeah, Joel, a lot of people might not know him. But again, it's like that comment that was put in. You're fighting a 10-0 guy. It's a cherry pick. That just means you've never done your homework. If you spend the time and research what Israel Madrimov did as an amateur and take a look at the types of performances he's had as a pro, you will know, as Terence Crawford has said, this is a real guy. This is not a cherry pick fight. This is a bona fide fight. The same way when you saw a guy like Lomachenko with a few fights winning world titles. It's the same kind of situation. I don't know if he's going to win the fight. Obviously, I think Crawford is he does have more experience, and he has been, battle tested quite a bit more. He has faced better opponents, obviously. So I think that Crawford will win the fight, but by no means do I think he gets there easily. I think it's the kind of fight where even if Madrimov loses, he loses in a manner that will make people say, wow, that dude's real good. I want to see him again. Okay, so he lost to the number one fighter in the world pound for pound. Who cares? Bring him back. He's a hell of a fighter.
Yeah, it just sort of has the same feeling as the Anthony Joshua fight in New York, where he was such a heavy favorite that everybody was really overlooking the Andy Ruiz upset. Apologies to anybody listening if you can hear. My son has just come downstairs and he's crying for me at the door, so bear with me on that. But just to finish off on the quotes, Israel Madrimov said, all the respect to Team Crawford. As I said before, he's my favorite fighter. But at the same time, I believe that I can prove that I'm the best in the world as well. I believe that anything is possible. My dream is to create something that nobody expects to do and win the fight that nobody expects me to win. Now, the comment about him being his favorite fighter there suggests that he's obviously watched a lot of Terence Crawford over the years.
For sure.
So could that go into his advantage in this fight, that he knows Crawford's fighting style inside and out, whereas Crawford's only really got 10 fights I know 10 fights is still a lot, but 10 fights rather than 40 to be able to look back on?
Well, I don't think Terence is the kind of guy that just sits there and watches the tape. He leaves that a lot to the trainer, to Brian McIntyre and the team to go over. He'll maybe look at a little bit of it, but he lets them analyze it and, tell him what they think about it. But what it strikes me is the following, is that if Israel Madrimov is by far and away the biggest fight of his career, both in terms of the magnitude, the level of attention, the number of dollars he's going to make, all of the business that goes into the fight, it's clearly the biggest fight of his life. That he's tunnel vision on that. He's taken on a guy that he admires, he respects, he looks up to, that he's followed, that he's a fan of. It's the biggest moment of his professional career. I don't know if I can say the same thing about Terence Crawford. Now, maybe it's probably as big as purse he's ever made, but all the competition stuff, it's not. This is not a bigger fight for Crawford than Spence. It's not a bigger fight probably for Crawford than when he went to the UK and won the lightweight title against Ricky Burns. It's certainly not a bigger fight for Terence in terms of the history books as it was when he knocked out Julius Ndongo in the second round to become the undisputed junior welterweight title. My point is this. Sometimes when it's the biggest thing that the other guys ever faced, they get up another level. And I'm not saying that Terence Crawford is overlooking Madrimov or not taking him seriously, but it's just human nature. It's not his biggest fight. It's not his top 3 or 4 biggest fights. And if there's just a little bit of difference there, that can make a difference in the fight. That would be something that I would look at that would be in favor of Israel Madrimov. That's his biggest fight, and he knows it. And it's not for Crawford.
Yeah, well, Dan, I'm just going to quickly run through some comments. So we've had here from PR Combat Sports 11, Madrimov is actually an underratedly tough opponent. People forget his amateur pedigree. And this reminds me of Canelo Bivol stylistically. What are your thoughts on that?
It doesn't remind me of Canelo Bivol stylistically because Bivol does not fight at all the way Madrimov fights. Bivol is not a puncher. Bivol is not an aggressive fighter. Bivol is more of a boxer with great technique and very quick hands. Madrimov is a guy that is more of a banger and a guy that wants to break you down. So I don't necessarily agree with that. But, look, if he wins, it's a big upset. But when you go back and you think about it, obviously we have to see how it plays out. I wouldn't consider it to be like, Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson caliber knockout, or rather upset. I wouldn't consider it even on the level of, say, when Anthony Joshua lost to Andy Ruiz. It'd be an upset, but we've seen bigger upsets. But this would be a very sizable one. But you can see it. It's conceivable to me. I'll put it to you like that. That's the way I look at it. It's conceivable that he can win the fight, in my mind.
And then the last comment before we move on to our predictions, and only casuals think it's a cherry pick fight. Madrimov is a beast. He'll be a nightmare for top 3 in the weight class. The guy has a belt for a reason. Regardless, Crawford needs that belt.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, the guy he beat, remember when he won the title, it was a vacant title. Jermell Charlo had the title. He was not going to be fighting in the weight division. There was questions whether he was going to ever come back in the weight class. He'd been off, not off in terms of out of the ring because he had fought Canelo, but he hadn't fought in the 154-pound weight class for quite a while. They made him the champion in recess. So if he wanted to come back into the weight class, he could ask for the opportunity to fight for the title and get a first crack at it. And so what was instead an eliminator between Madrimov and Kurbanov became for the vacant title. So, some people look down on guys that win vacant titles because they didn't take it from the champion. But Kurbanov, Kurbanov has a win over Liam Smith. Kurbanov was undefeated. Kurbanov has shown himself to be a good puncher. And it was a real fight. And I thought Madrimov looked outstanding in that fight. It took him a couple of rounds, but after about the second round, in my recollection, he really poured it on and took him apart.
Excellent stuff. Right, I'm going to give you one more comment, Dan, because this one has piqued my interest. It says, do you guys think Boots will eventually move up to 154 and get the Crawford fight?
Well, there's two answers to that. One, 100% he'll move up to 154. Will he get the Crawford fight? It seems unlikely at the moment. But if Turkey can't make Canelo against Crawford, and he looks around at the landscape, and he's mentioned the Boots and his fight prior, that might be the fallback position. And there's a chance that could happen. If you pay Terence Crawford enough money, I'm sure he'd fight anybody. And Boots obviously would love to have that kind of matchup. And that would be a big time fight. Now, the thing about that fight is they'd have to put up a huge amount of money, because we all know, if you're a diehard, that Boots is a superb, talented fighter, and he's a champion now, and has looked great. But he is just totally unknown to the general fan. He has not got a profile. He needs to have some bigger fights and fight some better names and be a little more active. And sort of, I'm not saying he doesn't need to earn the fight from the perspective of his talent. He needs to earn the fight in terms of where he can bring some attention and make it economically reasonable to make the match.
Excellent stuff, Dan. Right, we're going to run through the card. This isn't in any particular order other than the main event. So let's just start from Andy Cruz versus Antonio Moran. Dan, prediction and how they win. Andy Cruz, Antonio Moran.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is going to be like a no-hitter. This is Andy Cruz, do as he wants and win every round.
Isaac Cruz, Pitbull Cruz versus Jose Valenzuela.
Good fight. Exciting fight, I think, for a while. I think in the end, though, Pitbull probably, I don't know if he overpowers him. Maybe he stops him, but certainly he'll win the fight in my mind. I don't know if Valenzuela has enough to keep him off in terms of the amount of pressure that Pitbull typically will apply to his opponent.
Andy Ruiz, Jarrell Miller.
This is a really interesting fight. This is a fight that could go either way. I was impressed by the conditioning that Jarrell Miller showed in the fight. Andy Ruiz seems, though, that he wants to be back in business. He sounded excited to be back in action. Physically, he looked good. They both have really quick hands for heavyweights, particularly guys that big. They both have good punching power. I do think that Andy Ruiz is probably a little bit of a better puncher. I think that both guys could encounter some problems. It wouldn't shock me, frankly, if there were some knockdowns in this fight. But I think in the end, I don't know of a knockout, a decision. I kind of lean to Andy Ruiz to somehow find a way to get his hand raised when it's all said and done.
David Morrell versus Kalajdzic.
This is going to be a David Morrell masterclass, period.
And then finally, before the main event, Jared Anderson, Martin Bakole. Again,
flip a coin fight. Now, when I was doing my betting show, Bakole is like a plus 180 bet. I mean, that's a pretty big underdog in a fight. In my mind, is an even kind of toss-up fight. So based on the value of the wager, I picked Martin Bakole, and I can actually see him winning the fight because still have my questions about Jared Anderson's chin. And Martin Bakole, he was such a mountain of a man compared to the physique and the way that Jared looked like he's in better shape, but Martin Bakole is such a big dude. And, I think he's got heavy hands also. So I think that's another fight where if guys got knocked down, it wouldn't shock me. I guess I lean towards Bakole to maybe pull the upset.
We've had a question that says, tell him he has to pick one upset, Dan. Now, this is where I'm going to come in.
I picked Bakole. That's an upset.
That's the upset. That's the one you're going for. Because I was going to say, I'm going to pick Madrimov to beat Crawford on points. That is where I'm going to go. I think that if there's going to be an upset, a big major upset on this card, it'll be Madrimov getting the win unexpectedly. So on the main event, Dan, your thoughts?
I think that this is a fight that's a real fight. I think Madrimov will have some moments. I think he's going to give Terence Crawford a real fight for the first few rounds, particularly because if you watch Terence Crawford's career, he's not a fast starter. He usually takes 2 or 3 rounds to sort of feel out the opponent, just gauge all the different things you want to know, what he thinks of the speed, the power, the distance, the different matters that he's got to deal with. But I think by the time we get to the second half of the fight, he'll be quicker. He'll be landing more precise punches. Madrimov has a tendency to throw a little wild from the wide punches, and Crawford is such a precision guy. I think he can land in between those shots. He's got great timing. So I think as the fight gets later into the show here, you're going to see Crawford start to pick him apart and land more authoritatively, and maybe beat him down a little bit in the last part of the fight. But Madrimov will be tough, and Madrimov will give him some problems maybe in the first few rounds.
Excellent stuff, Dan. Right, we're gonna finish on one last question, and I just need to find it. This is the question. It says, "Is Fundora Spence going to get made?" Dan, what do you know, if anything?
I mean, that's a fight they've been talking about, but they've been talking about it for a while. I'll believe it when I see it. Errol Spence is not physically ready to be in a boxing ring at this moment in time. They'll have to wait and see what his status is. I know it's a fight that PBC would like to do. I know the Fundora camp has said they'll be happy to do the fight. Errol Spence has said he wants to do the fight, but I don't know if Errol Spence is going to be ready to fight, and if so, when. And they also, in terms of Fundora, they want to see what happens in, because remember, the winner of Madrimov against Crawford, the winner, of course, is going to be the WBA champion, but the winner is also going to win the interim WBO title, which is vacant, and it was available, they say, even though I had a nice argument with my friends at the WBO about it when I got here and I hung out with them in the bar on Wednesday night. They've made this title available because Fundora, who is the WBO champion, is not going to fight most likely, at least until the very end of this year, possibly not even until the early part of next year. So the point is, the winner of the fight on Saturday is going to be in a position to be the mandatory for Fundora. So they have to wait to see what happens in that fight, which, he could be ordered to fight Crawford or Madrimov. So they can't even finalize an Errol Spence fight just yet when Errol's not even, ready in terms of his physical health. So I think it can happen, but I wouldn't hold my breath necessarily about it.
Excellent stuff, Dan. Right, very last question before we wrap this up. Would you like to see Shakur fight Tank or Zepeda next?
I mean, I'd be happy to see either one of those fights. I actually saw Shakur. He's here. He was at the weigh-in. I said hello to him. He was actually mobbed by quite a few people, signing autographs and taking pictures. Had a lot of people looking after him, looking for him when he got there to the weigh-in. But in terms of the matchups, look, the bigger fight commercially is certainly against Tank Davis because he's a much bigger star and a much bigger name than William Zepeda. But from a stylistic point of view, I'm sort of infatuated with the Zepeda fight because it's the complete opposite style. Shakur is a stylish boxer with supreme defense and great skills and tremendous amateur background and all the things that go into the foundation of a fighter. And Zepeda is just this like whirlwind, throws a million punches, great punching power, seems to have a good chin, just extraordinarily aggressive. Like his offense basically is his defense because he doesn't give the opponent a chance to breathe. But if you said to me, you can make one fight or the other, I would probably have to make the fight against Tank just because it's a bigger fight and I like big events. But I like both fights though, absolutely. And the other part of that is that the Shakur fight against Zepeda may have a better chance to be made because it is the mandatory and it was ordered by the WBC. They have until August 20th to make a deal or they'll call a purse bid.
Excellent stuff, Dan. Right, we're going to wrap there. We are getting comments thick and fast, which is absolutely fantastic to see. I don't want to keep Dan too long.
I'll take a few more. I'm sitting here in my, I'm not going anywhere for a while.
All right then, Dan. Dan said Shakur Tank negotiations are off. Any changes to that?
Well, it's not that they're off. They were never on. That's the thing. There was some very, very misinformation that was reported that the fight was set, and that was simply not accurate. Now, that's not to say that the sides maybe haven't checked in with each other to see if there was any interest, but there's a long way to go just to say, hey, maybe we're interested to actually sitting down and going over the terms, when, where, obviously the money. You got to deal with the broadcast situation. You got to deal with Shakur would have to get an exception because they've ordered his mandatory. So there's a lot of things that have to go into making the fight. So the question is just simply not characterized in an accurate manner. Next
one says, what happened to Joseph Parker? He should get a big fight. I don't think anything's happened to Joe Parker, really. I think he's just...
nothing. I don't think anything happened. Joe was really busy. He had the stretch where he fought quite a few times in a short period of time, and I got to figure that he'll be back on one of these Riyadh season cards that takes place in the later part of the year. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him back on, say, possibly the Tyson Fury Usyk rematch undercard, or perhaps the better BFB undercard. There's no doubt he'll fight again this year. I wouldn't imagine why he wouldn't. He's on a nice hot streak. And he's got some good wins in his recent fights. So I think though he had fought several times in a short period of time, does take a toll, and so he's probably taking a rest. And I'm sure he'll be back on one of these big cards. And by the way, what would be a possibility? This is the fight that Andy Ruiz wants. He wants to fight a rematch against Joseph Parker. So if he wins, there might be a conversation with Turkey about making that rematch. Because remember, when Joseph Parker won the WBO vacant title, he did so against Andy Ruiz in a very, very close fight. And Andy has always wanted that rematch. That's his only loss in his career, other than the fight where he lost in the rematch against Anthony Joshua. So Joseph Parker, Andy Ruiz's second fight is certainly something I think that could be on the table.
Yeah, well, we know that Dillian White has called out. Joe Parker has called out Dillian White. Dillian White was ringside for Chisora. Chisora said he wants to have the trilogy fight with Dillian White. So there is a lot of spark going. As far as correct me if I'm wrong here, Dan. As far as I was aware, Joe Parker was potentially on standby to fight AJ if the Dubois fight fell through or if there was injury or anything. Is there anything in that?
I hadn't heard that particular, but that doesn't surprise me because anytime you have these types of fights at that level with that amount of money and a big undercard, you want to always try to have somebody that, just in case the worst happens, that you can still go through with a show that's still a reasonable event for the public. And if you can get a guy on the caliber of a Joseph Parker on standby and he has to fill in the main event, obviously that's pretty damn good if you ask me.
All right, next question then. Do you think we will ever see Canelo Benavidez?
I'd like to say we will see it eventually, but I'm skeptical.
We've got, where's the next one? UFC, right? So the next UFC event, as far as we know, is going to be on. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's a Mexican holiday. Canelo is fighting.
Yeah, so that's September 14th in Vegas, and you got Canelo fighting Berlanga at the T-Mobile Arena, and you have the UFC event that is a Mexican-themed event for their pay-per-view that's taking place at the new Sphere in Las Vegas. This very state-of-the-art building that's supposed to be phenomenal, mostly for concerts. But I guess this is going to be the first sporting event of any kind there. And Dana White from the UFC has been talking about how much money it's costing them to do the event, how much they've already spent to make it so they can do the UFC show there. And so there's a lot of people that were surprised when Canelo announced the fight for the same date, even though that was always the date he planned to fight on. Everybody knows that he goes on the Mexican Independence Day Saturday. So my perspective is, I know there's some overlap. There's definitely fans that are fans of boxing as well as of UFC. But I don't think it's so much of an overwhelming overlap that it's going to have some kind of crazy impact on the pay-per-view receipts for either event. And again, I don't follow UFC closely, so this is just what I was told. I actually asked one of my boxing writing friends that does also follow UFC pretty closely. And the way it was explained to me is that the show that they're doing on that Saturday at the Sphere is more of a big deal because of the venue, and the main event is not that big of a fight relative to your typical big pay-per-view UFC. So take that for what it's worth, and I guess we'll see, if they're able to actually both go forward. I mean, there's always conflicts, and sometimes they happen, but sometimes something happens where a fight gets postponed. There's an injury, whatever the case may be. So yeah, right now they're scheduled at the same time, and there's a good chance they'll both happen, and so be it, because I don't think that the overlap is all that great. That's going to have some kind of crazy impact on either side.
Right, last one then, Dan, before we do wrap things up. We're getting on to an hour here. So thank you, everybody, for watching. We really appreciate it. Me and Dan will be back on Tuesday, hopefully, Dan, if you're back in,
I'll be back.
Virginia.
Assuming my plane doesn't crash going home.
Yeah, well, with touch wood, that does not happen. We'll be back recording on Tuesday for a Wednesday release next week to review this card and talk about anything else that's happened in it. But one last question, Dan. Is Tim Tszyu a potential Crawford opponent?
Yes, absolutely. That would probably be the case because Tim Tszyu is going to come back in September. Remember the fight he was supposed to have against Erickson Lubin in an IBF eliminator. Lubin has got a hand injury and is no longer involved in that fight. So they're finding another opponent for Tim. But if he wins the September fight, I think there's no question that they would look to possibly make him one of the future possible opponents for Crawford. That's actually one of the more interesting fights. If Terence is the winner of the fight on Saturday and he's not fighting Canelo Alvarez in the next fight, and Tszyu is the victorious, that would absolutely be a fight that I think could be made and would be an interesting fight.
Excellent stuff. Right. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. We're going to wrap there. Dan and I will be back on Tuesday. Well, on Wednesdays, you'll see the show. And I think Michelle may be doing a post-fight reaction with Dan either in the arena or as a stream, live stream. So we will let you know as soon as we know that. But check out Title Sports Network. We've got loads of content coming from the post-fight of this event, as well as all the events coming up. We were disappointed to hear that Catterall Prograis was cancelled earlier this week, but that fight is going to be re-announced soon, hopefully. And yeah, there's loads of boxing coming up. Look, it's that time of the year now where the boxing really starts to ramp up now towards Christmas, this sort of last quarter of the year. So stay tuned to Title Sports Network. Dan and I will be back soon. Dan will be back maybe with Michelle. And we will see you all very, very soon. Catch you in a bit. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate your time as always.
You bet.